Hi, Emma. Okay, so welcome. If we haven't met, my name is Amelia Fisher. I'm a history major with minors in education and theater, and this is called Staging in Communities, Exploration of the Physical and Social Spaces of Puppetry. So I wanted to start by saying thank you for the Cynthia D. Kleindienst Award, making this project possible, and the Theater Film Dance Studies Department for approving my project. So what I did was I went to New York City and attended 3 puppet-centric Broadway productions and the 3rd International Puppet Fringe Festival. I want to start with the Meadowy panel because their remarks provide context for my findings. So, reading from their website, quote, "The Meadowy River Theater Company has been dramatizing myths, folk tales, and legends from diverse cultures for over 45 years. Our original theater productions incorporate masks, puppets, and giant figures with music, movement, and text. Each summer from 1975 to 2022, our step van was crowded with an array of creatures and characters. They eagerly spilled onto public lawns, bringing our productions to rural communities of upstate New York and New England. The tours have come to a close, but Meadowy continues to appear at parades and other special events," unquote. This panel was one of these special events, where core members of Meadowy made 2 observations that provided lenses for all of the things I was learning. One of their comments was about using space, and the other was about how community is ingrained in performing arts and puppetry. For time purposes, I want to focus on the community aspect. So one member of the troupe stated he remembered traveling to all these odd little corners of New England, places with limited access to professional theater, and putting on these shows, and he thought to himself, quote, "This is what theater is about." And that struck something in my core because so much of what I was hearing this week was about community, from how the Clemente, that's the venue of the Puppet Fest, specifically involved the community, the missions of the theater troupes, the themes of the narratives, the decisions made around what materials to use, it all had something to do with community. One aspect of performing arts in terms of community is accessibility. It's much harder to create a community around something inaccessible, but puppetry is accessible in so many ways. These kinds of Muppet-style puppets I built over the summer may be the first thing you imagine when I say puppetry, but anything can be a puppet. Object manipulation, or object theater, is a style of puppetry which uses everyday objects as the puppets. For example, Con Kilo de Harina, or A Kilo of Flour, tells the story of how an Italian family immigrates to Argentina. The roles of abuelo and abuela are played by lumps of dough. Kitchen tins make up the city backdrop. Flour is used to create textures like the sea foam on the waves here, or as a smoke effect, or it's sifted to make falling snow. The show Paper Cut also uses everyday objects and materials. When I asked the artist, Yael Razuli, many of the decisions she made were at first based on necessity rather than for stylistic reasons. Her whole show fits in 2 suitcases, including this collapsible cardboard desk. For lack of other actors, the voices of all the other characters come through the PA sound system. The troupe known as Junktown Duende makes their shows entirely out of trash, so here's a few notable set pieces here. My favorite is the giant chicken walking through. So small choices in terms of, let me skip. Small choices in terms of materials can make a big difference. The leader of the puppet workshop where I built this little guy, for example, didn't have any purple paint, so I made some. She explained to the group that her choice to offer black, white, and the primary colors, as opposed to also purchasing purple and orange and pink and indigo and any other color you can imagine here, was a small choice that cut her costs, subsequently cutting the cost of her program and making it more accessible to more families. Okay, so we're moving from puppetry being accessible for performers and towards how it's accessible for audiences. So a sizable population of this Lower East Side neighborhood was Hispanic and many families speaking Spanish. So in order for people to get the most out of the festival, the itinerary, volunteers and staff were bilingual. Several of the shows offered performances in Spanish, and that's great. But I could still follow the ones that were in Spanish, and some had little to no dialogue at all. That's because puppetry is primarily a visual art, often transcending the language barrier. The Lion King is my favorite example of this phenomenon. The Lion King has been enthralling audiences on Broadway since 1997. The marquee is plastered with welcome messages in Hindi, Arabic, Chinese, and others. The announcer asked if this was anyone's first Broadway show, and many people cheered. Even as I waited by the stage door, I learned the family next to me was visiting from Japan. The Lion King is an international phenomenon because it visually speaks to people, transcending that language barrier with its fantastic masks, costumes, choreography, and puppets. The last language that forms community around puppetry is a cultural one. It can be very strange and silly and unifying when you find yourself identifying with puppets. Audience interactions confirmed that these performers were speaking the same cultural languages as the audience. Parents laughed about modern Little Red Riding Hood's addiction to technology and over-reliance on her phone. People groaned when this alligator mentioned that they hiked the New York bus fare. They booed exploitative bosses and cat callers and cheered this little old lady Judy and her anarchist witch friends as they challenged the system that no longer served them. They booed gentrifiers and cheered the resilient cockroaches. While I was filming a cockroach's speech calling for the end of massacres, colonization, and sterilizations, I inadvertently caught this man on film turning to his daughter and saying, "That is a well-spoken cockroach." This man was able to identify with a giant cockroach because they were speaking the same language. These are stories people have access to because of their lived experiences, which leads me to the point of representation. I could be here all day if I dove into every show I saw. I could talk about Lion King's casting choices and African influence on the masks and costumes. I could even talk about the role of Rafiki specifically. I could talk about Seymour and Audrey on Skid Row and how the entire plot revolves around their struggles there. But the most personal example for me is Sesame Street. Sesame Street has always been a champion of diversity. Many inner city children have felt represented by the urban setting. When I asked my mom, a New York native, where is Sesame Street, she answered, quote, "You always understood it was somewhere in Queens. From the stoops, it looks more like Brooklyn, but as a kid, you knew it was New York City," unquote. Unprompted, she added, quote, "Here's the other thing, which was a big deal. On Sesame Street, you saw people of all different colors, and that was the case in New York City. My kindergarten class looked like a little United Nations. When I was 10 and moved from Queens to Long Island, 99% of the kids were white, but Sesame Street reflected New York at that time. And it continues to reflect a spectrum of diversity. The diversity doesn't end with the human cast. Sesame Street is populated with friendly characters that both help the children they represent feel represented and help other children connect with those they represent. There are Muppets that speak different languages and have different skin colors. There's a colorful cast of disabled Muppets with disabilities, both visible and invisible. As for the Muppets facing different economic, social, and political hardships, Sesame Street is a safe place for child audiences to encounter these real-life issues projected onto lovable fictional monsters. The lessons that Sesame Street teaches are fundamental in fostering positive communities. While the stage show serves more as a showcase of popular Sesame characters and songs, hits like Fuzzy and Blue and Orange encourage finding ways to include others despite their differences. And Bert and Ernie's But I Like You emphasizes that we can love one another despite our differences. In conclusion, the Clemente and all the artists they invited to the International Puppet Fringe Festival demonstrated that puppetry is an accessible form of play, entertainment, and community building. Adults and children can participate in the making, performance, and enjoyment of puppets, no matter what materials they have to work with. Puppetry is an art form that can give voices to those who've historically lacked proper representation in unique ways that benefit communities. I would love to talk more on certain subjects, but I'm just out of time, so feel free to approach me with any of your questions.